Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of Fit Chicks Chat. My name is Laura Jackson, and on today's episode, we are on part 2 of our menopause conversation, which I'm so excited about. Hi, Cheryl.
Hey, Laura.
So for those of you who caught last week, we have with us the incredible Dr. Cheryl Allen, who is a naturopathic doctor, also one of our lead instructors at Fit Chicks Academy on our brand new holistic perimenopause and menopause coach certification. But we wanted to bring Dr. Cheryl on too, just to have a conversation and dive in deeper around, demystifying menopause, having a conversation about why it's so important that not just as women, but as coaches, we have to really understand the nuances during these seasons of life. And that being not just, after your period stops, but perimenopause leading into that time, and then post-menopause after it's happened, right? And if you missed our last week's episode, you can go back and check it out because we dive into what all of that is. But on today's episode, we want to continue on to the conversation, really around how can we start to lead our menopausal journey. So I don't know if you want to give like a little quick recap before we dive into the actual strategies.
Yeah, and I think and you said it so, like, it's such an important conversation for us to have, whether we're talking about it for ourselves and our bodies, or if we're talking about for the clients that we're working with, because it impacts things. It impacts so many different facets of our physical wellness, our emotional wellness. It changes how our bodies respond to different movement and activity type things. Like, it really, like, I feel like we can't not have that conversation, And so then that leads into, then how do we, if we have this knowledge and awareness that perimenopause, menopause, postmenopause, all of these things impact, then what do we do with that information or awareness?
Well, and that's one thing I found too, as a coach, even taking all of my, health certifications, life coaching certifications, fitness certifications, it's like women are all lumped into this one group, right? It's like if you're between the ages of 18 to 65, these are the foods that how many servings of carbohydrates, of proteins, of fats you should have. Or, these are certain things for women that are different exercises based on our body type. But nothing was ever talked about in that context of this is what's happening hormonally, and this is why these things are so important, and this is what you need to shift.
Yeah.
So as I started to, because you don't know what you don't know, right? Like as I started to head toward that time in my life, I started seeking out the information, and I just really want it to be the opposite. I want this information to be talked about, that it's common knowledge, right? That these things are different, and that it's not like, oh my gosh, my body feels like it's suddenly a stranger to me and I'm going to go find out what's going on. Because unfortunately, most people don't know that they can go find out what's going on. They just rely on whether it be just getting that blanket kind of diagnosis from their doctor of saying, oh, you're just in menopause and you just have to deal with it.
Yeah.
Or, they're trying all these wacky diets and things that are out there on the internet that are making their symptoms worse. So that's kind of, one of my goals. And I always say that with Fit Chicks Academy, it's really about leading your own journey, being your own advocate for your own health. And if something's not working, to go and find what is, and having that at your fingertips. So I'd love to talk through, we kind of in the certification that we built, we kind of put it down to some steps of how we can start to lead our own menopausal journey. So I'd love for you to kind of talk through that, because most people don't even know where to start.
I know, right? And you're so right. I know. And that was really important to, in our creation of this course, was to get a sense of, if we are of the awareness that, okay, hormone changes affect things, then what is a good starting point? How do we then guide discussions around what even might be the best treatment approach? Because even when we look at breaking it down one step further, and to say, actually, our experiences are similar, but also a little bit different woman to woman in terms of going through the menopause transition. So when we're looking at it from a holistic perspective, what does that really mean? And how do we look at, again, what different systems are involved in going through that perimenopause and menopause transition? What different hormones are impacted? And then how do we even know what systems to target? Because it might be, again, similar, but not maybe necessarily the same for all women.
Well, and that's one thing that, you know, when you and I were sitting down and had our original conversations around this, you know, because I always wish we could just record those like offline conversations because there's so much goodness in them. Like, but we were just talking about, you know, how entering into menopause is different for everybody. And
Yeah.
like, how do you start to figure out what's your entry point? And that's where, you know, Dr. Cheryl came up with, well, why don't we break it down into these archetypes? Because all these different factors affect how your menopause transition and your journey is going to be. So, for example, if you are already holding on to excess weight, it'll be different than if you're maybe really thin, right? If you have, if you're already going into it with a pre-existing condition like thyroid issues or insulin resistance, you're going to have a totally different experience than if you don't. So as a coach, if you're coaching women and helping them, you know, with their health goals, and you don't know where that entry point is, you're kind of just shooting in the dark, right? You're just giving these blanket recommendations, which again, then you're just put into that lumped group that I was saying, 18 to 65, you know, eat this, don't eat that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where too, you know, we came up with this assessment tool. So I love, you know, we always talked about the first step is awareness, really just knowing that this is something that you need to focus on. We can't change what we don't acknowledge. The second is around education, as you were saying, around the hormones and understanding what's involved. And then for us, the next step would be to utilize something like the assessment tool to know what your entry point is.
Exactly. Because again, it's great to have an awareness of, okay, menopause, estrogen and progesterone are changing, but that forgets the facet that our body is, you know, it's a system that's impacted by this change. So fundamentally, if we've got a change that's happening in estrogen and progesterone, it's not going to stay isolated in a little area. It's going to create an impact on other systems. And depending on how those systems are functioning when we enter into perimenopause and menopause, that's going to change drastically what our experience is going to be going through that. So that's where it's really important. And what we want to highlight, again, from a coaching perspective, is the importance of looking at these other supportive systems and hormones.
Yeah, because every time we talk about menopause, and again, we talked about this more in depth in the last podcast, you know, everyone just talks about estrogen and progesterone, right? And it kind of feels like, okay, those are the only two hormones that are involved. And there's so many other hormones that are involved. And then they also the other systems that are involved outside of just, you know, our ovaries.
Mm-hmm.
So from the assessment tool, so if somebody is looking to start to lead their own journey. So again, just going through, we first talked about you got to be aware of it. The second is you have to understand what's going on in your bodies. So are you in perimenopause? Are you in menopause, postmenopause? And what the hormones are involved. You do the archetype quiz. And then we always talk behind the scenes. I mean, I always say this. I should say we always talk. I always say this, and I love to have your opinion too. The next step we always look at is the nutrition. Well, I always look at it as the nutrition.
Mm-hmm.
So why is nutrition such a foundational piece when it comes to menopause?
Yeah, and I would agree with you, Laura. Like the nutrition piece is so pivotal, and because it impacts and it arguably has the biggest potential to impact all of the above that we said. So when we're looking at the main systems that we want to look at supporting, so the digestive system, the liver, like these are both impacted hugely by what our nutrition is. And we can use nutrition as a therapeutic tool to help balance those systems as well. And I think as well, when we're looking at where someone is in that menopause journey, we can also use nutrition as a way to kind of balance hormones depending where someone is. So would there be the same nutrition recommendations, for a woman who's in perimenopause versus into postmenopause? And how can we use nutrition as a tool to not only as a health promotion, but also even as a therapeutic tool to create balance between these hormones?
Well, and that's the thing I always find so fascinating about nutrition is, you can change all the other lifestyle aspects. You could start taking the supplements, you could start doing all these things, but you can never, we say in fitness, you can never out train a bad diet. And I feel that way, you can never, outrun a bad diet or a non-nutritionally dense diet, because that's your first also way of getting in all the vitamins and minerals you need to support your hormones too, not just to mention to use them, like you said, therapeutically to balance out different systems. So that's why too, we have a very in-depth module in the certification where we dive so deep into what's different in nutrition when it comes to perimenopausal and menopausal clients, right? How do you need to shift their nutrition? Not just the actual foods, but also the habits and how they eat and the timing of when they eat. And then there's the menopause superfoods, which also help to support the body through osteoporosis and helping with pelvic floor health and all of these things, again, that we're not really taught about. And nutrition, at the end of our fork, there is so much power. And I just always think as health coaches, that is one of the things that we have and an expertise in that's so different than so many different practitioners and coaches out there. It can have huge, huge impact. So the next thing we talked about too, and this is why we always say nutrition first, because obviously it applies to everybody, but the next is movement. So I just kind of said osteoporosis, pelvic floor, but what is different for menopausal women? Why is it that we have to really change the way we move our bodies?
Yeah. And so again, often women are coming in because of different symptoms that are impacting their quality of life. Like, we say like hot flashes, these types. Yes, those are very obvious symptoms. But another key facet to a holistic approach is prevention and disease prevention as well. And so when we're looking at nutrition, this is where it can have another additional huge benefit, as well as with movement around these kind of health promotion ideas. So when we're looking at bone health and different strategies to use movement and nutrition from a bone health perspective, from a heart health perspective. And so there's these little tweaks and adjustments we want to do, even pelvic floor, like we were talking about. For a lot of women, they can't engage in the same type of movement and activity because of shifts in their pelvic floor. Like, who wants to work out if you're worried about, am I gonna pee my pants? Am I gonna, like, what's gonna happen that way? It's a real concern.
And pelvic floor changes so much during perimenopause and menopause. Everyone thinks pelvic floor is just after having a baby.
Yeah.
And again, that's just because the conversation is not out there. And then as fitness coaches, it's like, well, what do you mean that, as you've been working out with the same client for 10 years and suddenly they can't sit on a ball and, a mobility ball anymore? Why? Like, could be because pelvic floor changes are happening. So again, we've dedicated a whole module to that. We also dive into stress and mindset. So menopausal women are so much more sensitive to stress. And I think that in the world we live in today, stress is one of our biggest enemies when it comes to health. And it's really about learning not just about how stress affects the body, but I also think how to actually manage it. So, which is why, as a mindset coach, I include so much around being able to actually not just manage mindset, but emotional management. Because we don't have the tools to be able to process through things at all. And we're getting inundated with so much. And I know that you said, and I'd love for you to talk to this quickly, about how that the menopausal age, perimenopausal, menopausal age is when we have the most going on.
Right.
We're being hit from all angles. Kids, parents, work.
Yeah, I've like yet to meet a woman in perimenopause or menopause that is like sitting at home saying, like, I'm twiddling my thumbs. Like,
Yeah.
It's coming at a time where we've got so much going on. So it brings it back to looking at, our backup hormone producing system, our adrenal glands, which, in an ideal world become a tool that our body has access to balance our hormones from within, now is trying to juggle dealing with all of these other more, and again, our body will always prioritize these types of hormones as more important because they're part of our survival strategy, right? So it's not a bad response that the body has to produce cortisol, adrenaline, and these things, but it happens at a cost of not producing perhaps the most ideal balance of sex hormones, female hormones, these types of things. So it's a really, we couldn't have, it's such an important conversation to include stress, mindset, because that's what's triggering a stress response. It's coming from the brain.
Well, that's one thing most people don't realize is stress comes from our thoughts, right? Well, there's obviously different physical stresses, but emotional stress comes from our thoughts. So, and managing our emotions. So, the last thing that we are also going to include is around weight management and weight loss, because of course that is the hot topic when it comes to menopausal women is, oh my gosh, suddenly I have all this belly fat and I can't get rid of it. And again, that goes into all of the hormonal shifts that are happening in the systems that are involved, but how do we know where to start? And that's backing it up to the archetype quiz. Is there anything that you want to say on weight management or weight loss?
Yeah, just to highlight that again, it is something that we see commonly. I'm sure anyone listening has experienced that with clients that they're working with. And then that piece that I have found so helpful in doing this deeper exploration is to know, well, how do I apply different changes, again, depending on where someone is in that perimenopause? Is that going to be the same? Are women going to respond the same in terms of boosting metabolism perimenopause versus postmenopause? And there's some actually very key differences that we need to keep in mind when we're talking about the hormonal state that happens in perimenopause versus into menopause. And we'll go through and kind of demystify all of that. And then, and as well, to say that we know that there are strategies that can be helpful in shifting metabolism. So often women will feel like, well, I guess there's nothing I can do. That's just, there's nothing that can be done to shift that. But when you're coming at it from this angle of looking at nutrition, but then also changing the type of movement and then weaving that in with mindset, there can be huge changes that can happen with overall metabolism so that, again, we're able to live into our bodies in such a way that we're feeling great, our bodies are moving well, all of these things are possible.
Well, and that's where this is our quick and dirty podcast today, but that's where when we developed this course, we were looking at what does a coach need to know, but also what does every woman need to know? And we can't just focus. We were like, oh, should we just do, menopause nutrition, or should we just do a weight loss course for menopause? It's like, we can't, because you have to know all these pieces because they all work holistically together and they're going to get your clients the best results. And if you're someone who is looking to learn for yourself, these are all the things you need to know, because the game changes as we hit this season. And I cannot stress it enough. It's not just important for your clients. It's not just important for you because maybe you've gained a few pounds and you want to drop it. It's so important to your overall health and the quality of your life. So we really hope that you will join us in our upcoming holistic holistic perimenopause and menopause coach certification. Such a long name. So check it out. And thank you so much, Cheryl, for this conversation around menopause, and I will talk to you guys next week.
Bye.
Bye.